Hello, and welcome back to Practically Political. I'm Dave Spencer. I'm joined by my two comrades, Kurt Bardella and Ashley Davis. It is Friday, August 15th, 2025, and happy summer to everyone. It's the dog days of summer, I guess, in many ways, and as usual, there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So I thought, even though it's been in the news for a while, we would talk about the gerrymandering case in Texas because it really brings up a lot of issues here. And I'll just start off by saying a couple of things. First of all, it's really sad that we've come to a race to the bottom. I think both parties are guilty of this. And I was joking that if the legislators from Texas are going to flee anywhere, Illinois, even though I know Governor Pritzker is paying their bills, is probably not the best state to go to in terms of gerrymandering excess. Also, I think it's very sad that any rules, for example, it used to be every 10 years, but any modicum of decency, any tradition, any rules are out the window. But before that, I want to just remind everyone that the whole reason we're in this mess, or the reason it's greatly exacerbated, is the Supreme Court, and really specifically John Roberts. If you look back in 2013, the Shelby County versus Holder, that's where they got rid of the clause that required states to check with the federal government if they were changing their voting laws. So, of course, that unleashed a lot of it. And then 6 years later in Rucho versus Common Cause, that's when the Supreme Court said, and I never knew this was a word, that gerrymandering was non-justiciable. Now, there's a word for you. So, yes, both parties are guilty, but the court is, I think, most to blame. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Why don't we start with you, Kurt?
Yeah, I
Kurt,
mean, there are a
can you
couple
hear
of
me?
components to this. I think
Ashley, can
one,
you hear me?
my overriding belief has always been that voters should choose politicians, politicians shouldn't choose voters. Um, I think that we've seen throughout history both parties obviously engage in gerrymandering, and so there are, plenty of sins to go around here. I think what makes this so unique is really the level of which the executive branch is kind of dictating and driving this. I don't remember such an overt partisan gerrymandering being initiated by the White House and directing, uh, you know, in this case, Republicans to begin this arms race, if you will. Um, I tactically completely disagree with what Texas Democrats did. Uh, the I never think it looks good if you're running away from your own state. I'm here in Dallas, and I can tell you, no one here gives a rip what the governor of Illinois thinks. So I don't quite understand that. And ultimately, they're going to end up, as is reported today, coming back to Texas, and this is going to happen, and they're going to have to litigate this in the courts. And so, what was all of this for? No one a year from now is going to remember that Texas Democrats fled the state. They're just going to remember that this thing happened. Democrats once again are neutered and unable to stop anything, and so they have to resort to glorify publicity stunts to try to show their base that they are standing up to big bad Republicans. And I just think that if you're going to start with failure, with a strategy that leads to failure, um, you cannot expect anyone to rally behind you, and see the world your way. I think what's going on with the district thing is wrong. Anytime you interject this level of partisanship into matters that should be decided strictly by the voters, if they wanted to put forward a map and have the voters vote on it, like I would be more open to something like that. At least there's some sort of direct voter participation, but just drawing lines however we want. And most of the time, let's remember, so many times we go through all of this and then one court ends up striking it down. It goes through a litigated process. It's not even able to be implemented in time for any election. And so it's kind of a lot of political theater for nothing. The only person who is benefiting from this really politically, in my opinion, ironically enough, is California Governor Gavin Newsom.
Is he really, though? I'm just
In,
kidding.
in the Democratic presidential primary, he sure is.
I know. I was
Ashley,
just kidding
yeah,
with
what do
you.
you think?
Yeah. No, first of all, when I first came to Washington 25 years ago, at least we had the moderate Republicans, moderate Democrats, want to call them blue dogs, whatever you want to call them. The more we gerrymander, and listen, I agree with both of you. This has been a problem on both sides of the aisle. And I do want to throw in there, remember, like Eric Holder spent 10 years of his life doing redistricting around the country. And that was after the court cases. You were exactly right, Dave. But it's not like there hasn't been a chance. But what's gonna happen now is Texas, and I agree with you, Kurt, on them leaving Texas, because what they did miss is that vote on that flood money for the victims of the flood, and so that's just gonna be tough for them politically, but again, no one's really gonna remember it. But what I'm assuming, and someone tell me, because Dave, you live in California, is I'm assuming Newsom gets his ballot initiative done in November. So then we have 5 new seats in Texas, 5 new seats in California, give or take. I don't think Indiana's gonna do anything. The other only maybe Illinois again. I don't know how much more
Florida.
gerrymandering can they do. I was gonna say Florida's the only other Republican one I think will happen. You saw some of the other
Ohio, they're
states
talking
just
about
don't
it,
wanna
but
do it. Yeah, and Ohio actually is in a phase of their redistricting. I think there is a law, there was a law passed that they have to do it this year. So I just don't know how much more they can gerrymander either. I guess they could take out 1 or 2 seats, but listen, it's just becoming more polarizing, and it's just not something that I think's good policy at the end of the day. But you're right, Gavin Newsom is getting the best press over this. Um, and, obviously, Governor Abbott's, if you're on the right, people are respecting what he's done as well.
yeah, I would just add a couple of things. I think that at least the Democrats have tried to have independent redistricting. That certainly was the case in California, but you have to fight fire with fire. But here's my take. I think that this is an extraordinary amount of hubris on the part of Texas, because this whole thing is based on the mostly Latino, but voters of color that went to Trump in the 2024 election. And it is banking on them, A, staying with Trump and considering where the economy is heading. That's a gamble. And B, turning up for the midterm. So I think in the end, they're going to get maybe 1 or 2 seats if they're lucky. And it could put a lot of other congresspeople that aren't vulnerable.
I think
It's no
Dave
fun
first, but
if
I think he was
you're
gonna say put it on the other seats, especially when it's not Trump anymore.
right, right. So I think that if you're a congressperson who's used to winning by 20 points and now they're going to say, oh, well, you're still going to win, but it's only by 8 points. And then all of a sudden there's a blue wave, which is not unthinkable in the midterm. So I think we'll revisit, but I think it's going to come back to bite the Republicans. But I wanted to move on to something that really worries me, and that's Trump's decision to fire the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That is a very impartial. It's been always nonpartisan. The woman who was fired was confirmed on a bipartisan manner, and it's not just the job numbers, because we know Trump is never going to blame himself, so he has to look for a scapegoat. But it's cost of living adjustments, it's inflation, and the guy that he's nominated is one of these heritage uh, economists in the line of somebody like Stephen Moore, who is only 37 years old. Apparently, his dissertation from Northern Illinois University, or wherever he went,
Is it
is rambling and not coherent, and he's criticized this. And this is really something where we've talked before about the rule of law, and people can depend on the US because we mean what we say, but this is really taking us down a dangerous path. And of course, the Fed could be next. So is my fears are my fears overblown on this? And
I think
what say you, Ashley?
yeah, no, listen, I think that this is something, whether you agree, and I've talked to people on both sides of the aisle about this issue, because there are a lot of Republicans and Democrats, especially during Biden, when some of the numbers would come back, when they did adjustments after a month or 2, which they've done for years, I get that. And they were frustrated, not by the individual, but just about the process. So I think that, obviously, this is the stuff he does. He has the right to fire them, obviously, but I think that this is some of the stuff he does that really concerns people. And sometimes, justifiably so. But I think there should be a broader look at kind of some of our metrics that we use and that has nothing to do with the person. It shouldn't be political, but it should be about the process. And, I was I was doing some TV with the head of the CBO, and she was even saying that, I mean, it's a little bit different, but the same type of metrics driven process. And she said that even her agency, or whatever you want to call it, needs to be updated because how they track information sometimes has not been kept up with kind of how they're doing it in other parts of, finance, so Wall Street or whatever. I mean, it's just the federal government at sometimes as well. So I agree with you, Dave, but I also think is room for updates in general.
Yeah, there's room for updates. I think the issue is what Donald Trump is trying to do is actively suppress any negative information about the economy from ever coming out. And that's what's really driving this. He is going to turn the BLS, which is supposed to be completely nonpartisan, in fact, data science based, into a partisan propaganda arm of which then no one can trust the information and the accuracy and validity of the information being put out by the government. And the problem with that is so many economic indicators globally rely on what we have boastfully called the full faith and credit of the United States of America, and we are compromising that. And I think that it could have a very long-term negative impact in terms of how the United States is viewed, in terms of economic stability, in terms of the value of our dollar, in terms of how markets react to information put out by the U.S. There's going to have to be something at some point that replaces that nonpartisan, honest information. The answer, the answer to the problem for Donald Trump isn't to pretend like it's not happening and to make sure the information never comes out. At the end of the day, if Donald Trump goes out there and puts up ridiculous job numbers that we all know aren't true, but people at home aren't feeling that. They're not seeing that at the grocery store, at the pump, with their mortgage, with their loan rates, and their savings account. The Republicans are going to end up looking completely out of touch. I mean, that was one of the big problems for Biden and Democrats was they were trying to sell Bidenomics. No one at home was buying it, and they looked really out of touch, and the voters rejected them. Trump is kind of setting Republicans up for the same thing because he's going to put out these ridiculous numbers that are based in complete fanciful, not reality based at all. Republicans are going to be going around saying everything is great. It's the greatest economy in the history of mankind. And people at home are going to be looking at their wallet going, I don't feel that.
Do you think, Kurt, that do you think there's a blue wave? Like if the election was held right now, do you think there's a blue wave?
No, there wouldn't be a blue wave. Um, Republicans, though, would underperform what they should, having all the levers of power, certainly. I think that 8 months in is different than almost 2 years in. Voters who went to Donald Trump that are truly persuadable voters who are not reliable voters for one party or the other. They're willing to give Trump the benefit of the doubt for a minute. We get to November of next year, that goodwill, I think, will be lapsed, and I think people will have seen a lot of chaos, a lot of bluster, a lot of headlines. But again, if they're not feeling it in their day-to-day lives, and I'll tell you, every parent right now knows this, it's back to school time. You're at Target, you're at Michael's, you are buying a lot of stuff, gym clothes, uniforms, school supplies. You are noticing, oh, that things are more expensive this year than they were last year because they just are. Having just gone through this myself, our kids started school 2 days ago. Like it is more expensive now, and if that's still the trend a year from now, that's not something you can blame Joe Biden and Democrats for. Trump is going to own it 100%.
Well, I agree. And there's also, as you said, Kurt, Biden went through the same thing. Don't believe your wallet, believe me, right? And I just don't think it works. And in this case, I think it's going to be more transparent because there will be all kinds of independent economists who are going to be looking at the same data and saying, no, this is not true. And so I think that when you get down to it, and by the way, if you look at the canary in the coal mine, producer prices went up at their highest rate in almost 3 years, and that indicates that a lot of the stuff that it was ameliorating prices rising from all these tariffs are starting to run out. So I think it's going to get worse from here. But I agree with Kurt. Right now, if you look at the margin, I think it's 3%, whereas in previous years it was, you look back at 2018, it was about 6 or 7%. But I think that number will grow because I think the economy is only going to get worse. And already Trump's numbers on handling the economy have dropped 10 points in just a month or two, according to Pew. So I think we're heading for a not necessarily a crash, but certainly a big period of stagnation and a miasma of tariff slog, if you will. But I also wanted to move to DC because obviously Ashley lives there, and Kurt, you spent a lot of time there, and I've certainly spent a lot of my time there as well. And this whole thing with taking over the DC Police Department, sending in the troops, some people will defend it and say, well, the crime is terrible. And even though the numbers are down, how many percent, people still don't feel safe. And it's just temporary. And of course, the cynics will say this is just the latest in the authoritarian takeover. And it was LA, now it's DC, then it's going to be other blue cities. I do think if Trump were really serious about this, he would notice that a place like Memphis, Tennessee has the highest crime rate in the country, certainly the highest murder rate. And he might want to send some troops to red cities, but I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. But Ashley, you're the one who lives there now. What are your thoughts on this?
So I've got all sorts of layers here. One, I've lived in the city and in Washington for 25 years. So I have experienced it 100%. Has the crime gotten worse? Absolutely. It's gone down since its peak in 2023, which was horrific. I've had 6 friends alone with the carjacking issue. I know that, they've been carjacked. So I think that that is, the mayor has been working on trying to get that under control. I know that there's a lot of people saying, well, the numbers are down and there's only, 1,584 violent crimes, which is rape, murder, and armed robbery. I mean, in my opinion, raising a son in the city, that 1,584 is like one too many. So I think that the dynamic here, which I think is very interesting, that no one is talking about. The Mayor Bowser has been trying to make these changes for the last 3 years, whether it's the homeless camps, getting rid of those, or putting them in safe spaces, whether it's the carjacking issue, whether it's crime, whether it's she's a curfew in place right now for everybody under 17 years old because of this kind of juvenile groups that were like having major attacks in the city with individuals and people that were, in the neighborhoods or on the streets. So, what I think the most interesting dynamic of this is how the mayor has truly walked a fine line. I know that she's welcoming the help of the federal government because city council has been blocking her every step of the way. Obviously, I know that she has said publicly, we've all seen it, she does welcome some of it, but we don't want to take over. But the city council is so far left and won't let anything happen that I think that in a certain way, this is a welcome. I know it's a welcome opportunity for her as long as it doesn't go too far. Listen, I think 30 days, if 30 days happens, fine, in my opinion. But, I don't think we should like go in and change the home rule and all of that. But something needed to give. We couldn't get rid of these homeless sites forever because of city council. By the way, I do feel that people should have a place to live and we have the right services in place as well.
I think that when you look, I try to imagine how would we all feel about this if in 2014 Barack Obama had done the same thing, and if he was also targeting only red states or red cities and making the same argument. The Republicans that I knew back then would say this is an imperial presidency. This is a executive overreach run amok, that this is abuse of power. And I remember when Republicans used to be the small government party and wanted less of a centralized executive branch. That is what used to be one of the central tenets of conservatism. was that government works best when the government that is closest to the people is actually in power. Washington D.C. is always a little goofy because it's not exactly a city state, right? It's budgeted actually controlled by Congress. The House Oversight Committee, run by Republicans, has jurisdiction over Washington D.C. Um, and in many ways has more authority than even the city council does, which is something that I discovered when I worked at the Oversight Committee. I didn't know that part of the legislative portfolio. Ironically, the largest legislative portfolio that the Oversight Committee has is actually Washington D.C. Nothing else. I think that when you look at, you kind of have to take everything that's happening and provide a little 50,000 foot level. I see a president who's trying to silence um, criticism and data within the federal government with the firing of the BLS head. I see a president that's activating, military law enforcement personnel only in Democrat-run areas, hiding behind the guise of crime, violence, and homelessness. 8 of the top 10 cities with the highest murder rates and populations of at least 100,000 are Republicans: Mississippi, Alabama, Missouri, Tennessee, Ohio, Louisiana. If this is truly an emergency, which is the basis and predicate in which he's activating the National Guard, then why aren't you doing this in those places as well? If you're doing this in all places that have high violent crime, at least he would be ideologically consistent. What this is purely partisan and headline grabbing and a power flex. And I promise you, if we let him get away with it now, which he is and is going to, when he does it later for other purposes, no one's going to have a leg to stand on to stop. The precedent will already be set. And more we're watching this president systemically dismantle checks and balances and safeguards and jurisdictions to fit his political whims, and it just sounds an awful lot like China and Russia to me. And I don't think it's ever good when you have unchecked executive power running amok, smashing jurisdictions left and right. And that's really what this president is doing, while Congress and Republican majority abdicate responsibilities that they used to hold dear, while the judicial branch gets completely overrun and trampled on by Donald Trump, who really says, if you rule against me, I'm coming for you. Um, this isn't all happening in a vacuum. You have to piece it all together.
Well, and the
I mean,
spinelessness,
Kurt, do you really think? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say the spinelessness of the legislative branch. They have really decided to be a non-participant, just sit on the sidelines. And every time there's a whimper of something, like a stand, for example, Bill Cassidy, I thought he might actually take a stand against RFK. He's probably going to lose his primary anyway. He voted to convict, and he's a doctor, but of course he caved. That awful judge they just confirmed, right? Who was really a January 6th, Boban his name, a January 6th conspirator. Tom Tillis, he voted for him. I thought Tom Tillis was going to not run for re-election so he could be a man of principle. It just happens over and over again. And this BLS nominee is yet another chance for them to show some spine. But sadly, I'm not getting my hopes up. Ashley.
Kurt, do you think? I know I was just going to ask Kurt, because I know we were pretty much similar on this with the border and that security. Do you think Democrats taking on this anti-crime, which is what Republicans are going to say, whether it's true or not, but that's just how it's going to be messaged. Do you think that's a winning message at the end of the day? Take all
No,
emotion out of it.
no,
Yeah.
politically, it's a terrible fight, and Democrats shouldn't take the bait. Like they
And
should keep this
Yeah.
fight right now
Trump
centered.
knows that. Obviously, that's why he's one
Um,
of these. He's doing it.
Totally knows it.
He's
Oh,
We're
well,
not talking about
he's daring
Epstein
them to
right
come
now,
in.
are we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trump should. I mean, Democrats should keep the focus on the economy because that's where Trump is at his most vulnerable, in my opinion. But we should not. I mean, even though it's politically bad, I think it just needs to point out, like, what is being done right now. If any Democrat had done the same thing, Republicans would be losing their minds, calling for impeachments. I mean, I watched Paul Ryan walk down the House floor and call Barack Obama Emperor Obama one time over an executive order he signed that meant nothing. It's just jarring as someone who was on that side, who listened to many of these same Republicans at the time hold hearing after hearing literally with the title executive overreach, executive abuse, when Barack Obama was president, be cheering on this executive power grab that we're seeing from Donald Trump. I'm just making the point that for the Jim Jordans that were there with us at that oversight committee, who are now chairing the Judiciary Committee and cheering on Donald Trump, it is the height of ideological inconsistency and hypocrisy.
And totally selling out on spending. Remember the Freedom Caucus? Ooh, they were going to be so tough on spending. Chip Roy, Jim Jordan, we can't take it. And then they fold like pup tents. But I agree with you. I think it's going to be the economy that brings him down. And I think he's, as is often the case, he's going to be his own worst enemy. But I wanted to move on because today, of course, is Summit Day in Alaska, between our president and the Russian president, and the fact that Putin's even coming to the United States, where he can't go to most countries because he's a warm.
I can see Russia from my house. Sarah Palin was
Exactly.
right.
God, I miss Sarah Palin, though she was the one who started. When you look at the dumbing down of the Republican Party, remember it used to be the intellectual party, and now it's the dim-witted party. She was really the one that started that, but that's for another day. But so I think Putin is coming in. He's confident. He's played Trump. He feels he can do it again. And he's not going to agree to anything unless there's territorial concessions, unless Ukraine is essentially neutered. To me, the most important thing is the security guarantee, because without that, he's violated every agreement and he'll do it again. But what are your thoughts on this? Why don't we start with you, Kurt?
I mean, again, we'll see what comes up. Donald Trump has put a lot of his reputation at stake, and really his brand is the art of the deal, the master negotiator. The one thing that's been hanging over his head, really, his entire presidency so far, was that promise that on day one, all of these conflicts will end because I am president, and everyone will heel to me because they didn't want to work with Joe Biden, but they'll work with me. Like, well, put up or shut up. Like that's kind of where we're at right now. Let's see if the cult personality that is Donald Trump is powerful enough to get Putin and Zelensky to broker some sort of long-term ceasefire towards the path of ending this engagement completely. Putin time and again has made Donald Trump look really bad. I think Trump's kind of tired of that shtick. I think that he recognizes it is a bad look for Trump to go out there and make these pronouncements, and then the next day Putin starts bombing, Kiev, and Trump's left holding the bag, looking like an idiot. He's tired of that routine, certainly. What will come of this? I don't know. I think that uh, Zelensky has been perfectly clear what he's willing to accept and not accept, and so any effort to try to move him off that seems like a non-starter for Zelensky. Clearly, Zelensky is not swayed by, well, then you'll lose the support of the United States. He's already lost it over it. I mean, that was the entire campaign of 2024, frankly. And Zelensky still held still with resolve and conviction. I think that's one thing that Donald Trump doesn't quite understand fully, because Trump is not, he is an opportunist, he is transactional. He actually doesn't have really core convictions. Zelensky seems to, and I don't know if Trump knows how to deal with that at times.
I just don't know though. Well, first of all, we did just send over new weapons, obviously bought by Europe, but we did move back from the campaign promise for sure, which obviously makes some of the right angry. But I mean, I totally appreciate, and you guys know my politics in regards to foreign policy. I'm very much a hawk. But I totally appreciate Zelensky's position. I just don't know how much power he has to actually keep that position. So obviously, Trump has come around a little bit more to him recently. There is no doubt in my mind, all the rhetoric of, oh, Trump's doing this like by the seat of his pants. From my White House days, there is no doubt in my mind that the Russian staff and the White House staff do not have this buttoned up as much as humanly possible because of letting each principal, not just Trump, but also Putin, come together. I just think that this is more organized than people think. And two things I'm watching. One, the fact that Lutnick and Besant are going to this as well, which means to me, obviously Rubio's going, but which means to me a lot of this is economic, probably surrounding
Sanctions.
the secondary sanctions, especially with Brazil and India. From what I've been told from some of my sources, that India is putting tremendous pressure on Russia because they're getting killed with the
Mhm.
50%. And then the second thing I'm watching is, does Zelensky come this weekend? Like, does it get to that point, or is there like a meeting in 2 weeks? Like, do they just I think something comes out of this because I hopefully people stop dying. But I just, there's a I guess it's my American backup too. It's like, well, everyone's making all these demands, but they want our help. And like Europe's really not stepping up that much. I mean, I know that the dynamics and how much money they said they spent, but do they have the ability to step up more? I don't know. It's really up to us to solve this problem.
Yes. Well, my worry is that if there's a deal between Putin and Trump that isn't favorable to Ukraine, that Putin is that Trump is then going to make Zelensky the bad guy for taking a deal that's not favorable to Ukraine. My hope is that there's no deal, and I don't really see that there's going to be a deal here. If there's no deal, then I think that will Trump follow through on the sanctions? Will he come through as he's promised? Because the Lindsey Grahams of the world are sitting in the Senate waiting to pass them. So I really hope that's going to happen. But I think overall it's a win for Putin, and we'll see what happens. They are having a press conference, which I think what will happen unless one of them really pisses the other one off, which hopefully will not be the case. But I certainly wish them well, and I think it's certainly better that they're meeting than they're not meeting. But
Talk is good.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So on that note, we will have to wrap it up. I thank all of you for joining us once again on Practically Political. And for my two partners in crime, I thanks so much, and we will see you next time.